Hello, everybody, and welcome to Radio Free Nintendo. I am your host, John Lindemann. This is episode 931. It is June 26, 2025, and joining me, as always, is the effervescent Greg Leahy.
That's an interesting. I don't think I've been called that before, but yeah, I'll just say the obligatory "ahoy, hoy, everyone," and we'll move on.
And the transcendent Guillaume Veillette.
Yes. That's me, Transcendent. Hello.
James is out this week, so I am sitting in the hosting chair, and I will try to live up to his lofty standards. This week, we're going to be focusing on email because we haven't done a whole lot of email in the past couple of shows, and we don't have a whole lot of new business. So even though the one thing I would want to bring up, though, I just got this email from Nintendo saying that Super Mario Strikers is actually coming out. That's brand new news, right?
That is brand new news. It's breaking at this minute.
Yeah, it's the only thing I would say is that was one of the games that they had. Obviously, we had the initial 3 for the GameCube games on Switch 2, F-Zero GX, Wind Waker, and Soul Calibur 2, but there were a number of others that were shown as being, like the box arts or whatever in a direct broadcast. And Striker specifically was actually demoed for people, that got to go to those pre-launch events. Strikers, even though it wasn't one of the launch 3, was something that people could test out as part of, seeing how the GameCube games worked on Switch 2. So it always seemed like the logical choice as the next game. But yeah, that is, just breaking tonight. I guess and that's next week, right? So yeah, that'll be, clearly they want to announce it as soon as possible to get in on the halo effect of all that wonderful Club World Cup publicity that's going on at the minute. You got to bathe in the glow of FIFA's, largesse.
That 20% capacity, stadium experience. They have to try to recreate it.
That's the thing. If you play Strikers long enough, you'll be able to start imagining, Hammer Brothers, filling the empty seats or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So that's coming out on July the 3rd. Yeah. Good. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that was actually a good game. I can't recall if I'm sure I picked it up because at that time I just bought literally anything and everything. But that was a good game. I always really enjoyed Mario Strikers.
The original Strikers was one of those that was, towards the end of the GameCube's life. So I don't know whether people that might have skipped it and might be more likely have played the Wii version, Strikers Charged, because, obviously Wii was pretty, it was a much better selling console, but that had the sort of benefit of, instead of being a late game on a dying console, it was an early game on a successful one when there still weren't that many games, yet for Wii. So I do wonder whether more people gave that a go. And there were some things that were it was very much a sequel, the Wii game, where it's like, let's just do that, but more, which made sense considering, like I said, the limited number of people that played the first game. But it had online play, but without any ability to patch games properly on Wii. That was a problem because, any kind of balancing or exploit kind of correction wasn't really doable. So it had a bit of a short kind of half-life as an enjoyable online game, but it was still fun, locally and stuff. But it'd be interesting to go back to that first one, I think, in that sense, because it was definitely less leveraged on the whole, a Super Strike thing. It was okay, you could have a Super Strike, and this is the same, I believe, in the most recent Mario Strikers game, the one on Switch, which is okay, you could do this, if you can find a way to be safe enough to take ages to charge up a shot in the opposition half, you could score 2 goals at once with a mega shot, but in the sequel, it was it could be way more than it could be 5 or something. I can't even remember. But it triggered this mini game, a pointer based mini game where the opposition keeper has to it gets telegraphed for them where the balls are going to come in, and they had to match it by kind of hitting the pointer at the right time on those spots. And yeah, that was the numbers involved meant that could kind of overwhelm just like the regular playing of the game. And it's based on like a mini game. And, the point, depending on your environment with that IR sensor, that pointer could be pretty good or it could be pretty dodgy. I mean, that was probably a change that not everyone was hugely in favour of. So yeah, like I say, it'd be interesting to go back to basics, as it were, and see how that held up back then.
Yeah, I'm sure there's somebody out there who's completely willing to die on the hill that Mario Strikers, that's the purest version of the game, and anything else is complete heresy. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting. That just came across at 6 p.m. Pacific, my time, so I thought that was pretty interesting. All right, so let's move on to email here. All right, I'll read the first one here. Matthew writes, "Hey, so I was just listening to your podcast from the 22nd, episode 930. So I thought the GameStop employee denying to say what stock he had, even of PS5 Pros, was extra hilarious because I recently have been trying to get my hands on a Switch 2. I called my local GameStop last Saturday, and after getting through the phone tree, I asked the guy who answered the phone if they had any Switch 2s in stock. He essentially said, 'Oh yeah, I think we've got like 9 of them. Feel free to come by if you want to get one, but you should probably come quick to make sure you get one.' I then drove there about 10 to 15 minutes away from me. There was a slight line of 3 or 4 people in front of me. Most were buying a Switch 2, and some kid, probably 10 to 12, I don't know, was buying used Wii games, one of which I think was Wii Sports Resort."
I love that. That is like, it wasn't even like alive when the game came out. That's brilliant.
Yeah. That must be something where somebody exposed him to a bunch of Wii games at their place, and or like their dad had a Wii lying around or something.
Just said, yeah, you take it, and then now he wants more games for it or whatever. But I hope they, got the Motion Plus for Wii Sports Resort, because it's, kind of important.
Yeah, I mean, pretty good console for a 10 to 12-year-old, though, really, overall. Anyway, once it was my turn, he said, "Oh, we only have the bundle," to which I said, "Well, that's the one I want anyways." He went into the back, brought it out, and then I bought it after he asked me a few times if I wanted to buy a pro membership or a warranty for it, to which I said no. I then finally walked out of the store with the console and went home. For context, I think this was maybe the first time I've been inside a GameStop since the pandemic, since I mostly play on PC these days, while my launch day non-scalped PS5 just collects dust next to my TV. Anyway, keep up the good work. Love the show. Have a good week. Yeah, it was pretty much the same for me. I had not been inside a GameStop for probably since the last time I traded in consoles. I think the last console trade-in I probably did was on my PS5. Well, no, I bought my PS5 actually at Best Buy because they were so hard to buy at that time. But I think the last console trade-in I did was my PlayStation 4 on my Xbox Series X. I think that's the last one I did, I think. So, yeah, but I thought it was very strange that guy was pretty much, giving me some military-style response.
Yeah, I guess they run a tight ship at that store, that individual store. What can you say?
Yeah, I'm not at liberty to say. It's okay. I wasn't asking you for military secrets. But yeah, it was funny. I just always feel like going to GameStop, I'm perfectly okay doing it about every 5 years, but I feel like every time you go in there, it's a little slice of life. Like, it's just, the people that you see come in, the people that you see come out, the people that work there, the whole trade-in process and that whole thing, because you're there for a while. It's an interesting slice of life that you kind of dip in and you're like, okay, cool. I'm totally cool not ever going to GameStop. Not that I feel like there's not a lot of game stuff at GameStop anymore. Really.
Oh,
like,
sure.
You talk about
yeah.
these Funko Pops and stuff. It's just, they're just trying to sell you. They're just trying to push merch.
Well, now in Canada, of course, it's been bought, the Canadian branch, and now it's been renamed EB Games. Yeah, so it's no longer GameStop. But Karen and I have been going kind of regularly because Karen has become a figurine collector. And so very often we just go there to look at the figurines, and sometimes buying something, most times not. But that's how I ended up with like a mouthful car. Kirby.
Mouthful mode, Kirby. Yeah,
mouthful mode, Kirby. Yes. It was very cheap, and so it's not actually a functioning, toy car. The wheels are not spinning wheels. It's just it's really the cheapest possible figurine you could have, but it does look like Kirby trying to eat a car from the top. So yeah, I guess that's the last thing I bought at a GameStop.
You see, it seems like John's tale provoked quite a response. We had another email we'll be probably addressing another episode that was inspired by it. We had the Lemonade on the response to the article talking about how, yes, indeed, roaches nesting in electronics is a thing.
Oh. Yeah, but I mean, it makes sense because the bugs would be attracted to warmth, but that's nasty.
I was thinking to myself, when's the last time I actually bought something from, the UK kind of equivalent? Because, yeah, I've not been in one since the pandemic either. That's an obvious kind of line of demarcation. But before then, I think there was the odd time where, I might have been in just look, the vicinity of a store and thought, oh, let's have a look. And it's much the same kind of trends, right? Much more about like merch and, figures and stuff than like actual games, compared to the old days. But I think the best I've been able to pin it down is I think I bought a copy of Mario Kart Wii on launch day at an actual shop. That was it. There you go. That's how long ago it was. I'm pretty sure.
What is the equivalent in the UK, Greg?
It was Game. Just Game. That's it.
Just Game. Yeah. Okay.
There was another chain like Game Station, but I think they like bought them or they merged at some point. Yeah, so I didn't avail myself of them terribly much over the years, but and like I said, the pandemic pretty much just kind of put a hard stop to that, really. But like is it that Mario Kart Wii scenario? I think it was just like, you know what, like I want to, because he was coming out in Europe before it came out in America, which is bizarre to think about now, really, isn't it? What was it with that? But that did happen, and I was like, well, I want to be able to talk about it on the show like as quickly as possible. I ended up writing a review for Nintendo World Report and all that, so it's like, okay, let's just go there and get it right. That was the last time I can remember such a thing.
Yeah.
Getting away from the GameStop topic and the kid who was buying some Wii games, this just reminds me that last month I had like my old roommate, old friend visiting from Victoria, British Columbia. And his son is, I think, 8. And my friend did not, never really was that into video games. And I knew that they were planning on buying him a Switch at some point, and I warned them, there's going to be a Switch 2, maybe don't. So I got updated on the plans there. They were going to wait and get a Switch 2 maybe towards the end of this year. In the meantime, though, somehow they got him a Wii from one of his friends in Victoria, I assume, who gave them the Wii, and it had some games on it. So I had been warned when I was going to meet his son, he's going to have lots of questions for you about Nintendo, lots of questions about Zelda. I'm like, okay, yeah, about Zelda. And I guess I'm not the biggest fan of, Zelda. I'm not sure if I can answer every Zelda-related question out there, but yeah, sure, okay. But, so which... And so, turns out he's very much into Ocarina of Time. Because there was the N64 ROM, there was the Virtual Console ROM on the Switch. So he's been playing that. And I was just scratching my head. I actually ended up kind of quizzing him, so who was patient zero here? You're talking about playing Ocarina of Time, and you're talking about this game to your friends. You seem to he and his friends were communally all playing Ocarina of Time and discussing it and shit. I was like, how does that happen?
That is a strange
2025.
When you that kind of saliency when you don't have anything kind of current about it is strange.
It is very strange. It turns out that he was the patient zero. He started playing it because it was on the Wii, and then he told his friend about it. His friend is like, "Oh, I think my dad has that," and so his friend started playing it, and it's wow,
everybody's dad would have it. Right. But it's weird. It's weird, right? Because it's one of those things that makes me think about the state of gaming today, because always, I mean, up to this point, really, games have always just moved forward, right? Probably until maybe the last 10 years or so, where it's these games of this generation, you play them until the console is dead, then you don't play them anymore. And then the next wave comes, and then you don't play those anymore. And it's just was kind of like always moving forward and pushing stuff to the side. But now it's just this, there's so many retro games available that it's really hard to predict what any kid would be exposed to or gravitate towards. Like,
right.
maybe their dad or mom has a Steam Deck and they start playing some random, maybe they start, playing a absolutely legally acquired Super Nintendo game on that thing. Just, there's all kinds of stuff. So it's a lot harder to predict what kids are going to be playing. Teenagers probably easier, but with kids, a lot of it, I think there's a lot more influence from what their parents have lying around retro-wise nowadays. Because there's just so many, the retro scene is so huge.
Because like people
it wasn't like that.
Yeah, people might forget, but like from the, sure, like there was Super Mario All-Stars on the Super Nintendo, but first, like they were remakes, right? Like they got a makeover, and second, that was a collection. And it was kind of like not a commonly seen thing. I guess there were like a Ninja Gaiden collection and the Wily Wars on Genesis, but it was not.
Yeah, Super Mario All-Stars was weird when it came out.
Yeah,
that was just weird.
Right, and then like Nintendo 64, it's like the most. Like Sony was kind of like was not outright denying most games, I think, but like a lot of like 2D games, like they didn't. They didn't really want them on their console, at least in North America.
No, it was a very different
There were stories
picture.
of SNK having to bundle games because they couldn't sell one 2D game by itself, apparently.
It was a very different picture in Japan, I think, where you had like a bunch of Sunsoft NES games on PlayStation, CDs and all that. There was a bit more of an embrace there of, kind of retro stuff, because the kind of the price of entry on PlayStation with CDs bringing the cost down of games meant that, it's like, okay, maybe people won't pay that much for these games when they're not cutting edge, but they don't have to, because like, this isn't some crazy expensive cartridge format. But yeah, a lot of that didn't necessarily cross over outside of Japan, or not to the same extent anyway. And then meanwhile, Nintendo was off on their, like the stupidly expensive cartridges, but it's like, but it's for the most cutting edge, 3D games thing. So it didn't really leave a lot of room for exploring, the past at that stage.
Right.
So yeah, it's true.
And
I did think of something though. It was kind of thinking about Ocarina of Time. Would they at any point put essentially that GameCube Master Quest disc on the GameCube service, or could they put the Master Quest on the N64 service? I'm trying to think, like, technically what would be. I know the latter disc that had more games, like Majora's Mask, was a bit wonky in terms of the emulation, but Master Quest, I did play through the Master Quest on that GameCube disc, and it seemed fine. So I don't know, maybe because obviously that was like folded into the 3DS game. Right, but the kind of Master Quest, like it was like a hard mode as well in that case. And did they flip everything? Or something, I forget, but, so it's not as if it's not come back in any form since that GameCube pre-order disc, 20 odd years ago, but, it would be interesting to see if they would do that.
Yeah, I was a victim to that Majora's Mask, wonky version, and that's probably why I never finished it to this day.
Well, the thing is about that, you wouldn't want anything to mess up, like, save files and stuff with that game. I don't know whether that was part of it. Well, it was harder to save the game, right? So it's like, if you had an emulation problem, did it crash or anything? Is that, like, what happened with it, or...?
Yeah, I think it just crashed, and so like any save in that game was a soft save unless you, made it to an owl statue.
Came all the way. Like I think, the owl statues were the interrupt saves. And so, you didn't really have your progress. And I think that was added compared to the Japanese version. The Japanese version was just you save when you travel back to the start of the first day. But of course, because I ran into this, nothing to do with emulation, but because we had a power cut. So, and then I presumably, when I started playing, it had been from a soft save, an owl statue scenario. And then, because the power cut, then it takes you all the way back to the last time you saved on the first day. So, that's something you wouldn't want. It's less than ideal in that scenario. But so I think the Ocarina disc was all right.
So what questions did he ask about Ocarina of Time?
I don't especially remember. I was probably disappointing on that front, but because I was, I haven't played this in literally probably a decade. So
he wasn't pulling out Hyrule Historia.
Even just and the 3DS version is stupidly old at this point. That's the sad part of it.
Yeah, it's been out a while.
And some questions about what he should do, where he should go next, and stuff he could look up on the internet. I suppose. Yeah. But also what's your favorite one, and I don't know. I just explained to him my journey as a Nintendo gamer, I suppose. I had to explain, I don't collect these systems. I just don't sell them. I buy them as they come out. And then he caught me on a kind of I guess I worded it poorly. I said, as they come out, as if, I get them day and date. But then I had to explain, actually, I did get rid of my GameCube. And, that one I didn't get it. Anyway, it was, I don't know. It was all over the place. I don't have a whole lot of conversations with 8-year-olds, but I assume they mostly go that way.
So you still have growth in terms of being a Nintendo mentor, it sounds,
I love the idea.
Nintendo Big Brother.
I love the idea of someone's, sort of taste in games being fashioned by the virtual console library that was, bequeathed to them might not even be someone they know. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's other, because there could be some random stuff.
Right?
Ocarina of Time is, a major event in gaming history, certainly Nintendo history. But I'm just thinking about all the stuff that was the N64 games were, pretty much just the major ones, right? That was what there was to release, I guess, in that case. But certainly you think of all the, the PC Engine, Turbo Graphics, there's just somebody becoming a huge shoot 'em up fan because of Lords of Thunder. Also, I love the idea. The odds seem quite slim, but this does raise the possibility more in my mind than previously, so I find that comforting.
It's like a grand experiment of, it's like if you throw a child in front of the, virtual console, what will they gravitate towards? If they think that that's all that exists, what will they play? It's terrifying.
Yes.
All right. The next email, Guy, do you want to read that one from Adolf?
Sure. Adolf writes, what Switch 1 games should get upgraded Switch 2 editions that Nintendo hasn't already announced? Any Wii U games re-releases? What ideas do you have for potential new DLC? I'm surprised that Super Mario Bros. Wonder isn't getting a 4K HDR upgrade, and maybe 25 or so new quote-unquote challenge levels. P.S. If a goddamn fish skeleton can be playable character in Mario Kart World, why not Wart?
That's a valid question. Yeah, so... How many?
Don't really have a great answer for it. I mean, it could be possible. There's quite a lot of Super Mario Brothers 2 USA Doki Doki Panic references in Mario Kart World, right? You've got that car that's like the magic carpet, that's from Super Mario Brothers 2, isn't it? So
yeah,
it feels like it could have happened. I mean, we talked about this a little bit already in terms of there's characters that have been in it before. that, you know, not just, you know, I mean, Wart has never been in much, has he, since Doki Doki Panic / Super Mario Bros. USA. I mean, there's the cameo in Link's Awakening, I want to say. And yes. that was like faithfully reprised in the remake. So there's that, but there really hasn't.
I believe so, yeah.
And I mean, that is like absolutely spot on, like his presence there, because it's another game that is, you know, has a dream-like, you know, quality or dream theming. So that was exactly the right place for him. But yeah, obviously it's not like there's some like obscurity threshold that he's simply passed beyond and can't come back because they're just, you know, doing whatever they feel like here. But you've got like, K-Mech, right, is just an item in the, essentially, like, rather than a character, which he just kind of was going to be in Mario Kart 64, like, in the early versions that they showed to the public, like, you know, when it was called Super Mario Kart R, K-Mech was going to be in it, or just Magic Koopa or whatever, and then, no, he got dropped for, I think, you know, the redesigned Donkey Kong. It was either him or Wario that came in instead. And then, you know, other characters, you know, like Koopa Kids we mentioned, like, yeah, there's loads of more prominent characters that have been dropped essentially for the penguin, the cow, the fish skeleton. So, I don't know whether that says it's more likely that more stuff will come in the future, or you would think it's possible with cosmetics at least, or whatever. But again, I think we've already mentioned you can't take anything for granted. You know what I mean? Because as much as, you know, it certainly wouldn't like find no audience because people are going to keep buying Mario Kart. They will also have to ask themselves, will it, you know, actually have any impact? Like, you know, does it need to be like kind of stimulated by new characters or whatever? Because like people are just buying it anyway. I get that these are the kind of calculations that, you know, they make. And it's some of those kinds of calculations, presumably, that will go into the core of Adolf's question there about Switch 2 editions and all that kind of thing. I guess the Wii U part is interesting because, of course, so many Wii U games you've got another chance on Switch, right? So it's like we've covered a great many of those. There's not terribly many left. Xenoblade X was like the big one. And we just got the Switch edition, which is, you know, very nice. I guess, you know, maybe it could be even nicer with bespoke adjustments for playing on Switch 2, but I was very pleased with the experience on my OLED Switch.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the things that you would think that would be upgraded on the Switch, like draw distance and stuff like that, is really not a problem in that game.
No, I mean, I compared to the previous Xenoblade games on Switch, Xenoblade X just seemed like it was technically a cut above. Yeah, the image quality, everything about it just seemed like, you know, it's a shame we couldn't have got to this level of proficiency sooner, you know, but that's very easy for me to say, rather than, you know, all those years of, you know, learning the hardware and, you know, understanding, you know, what you can and can't get out of it and all that. I'm sure it was a lot of work on Monolith's part and all that. But, I guess the point is that, you know, some of these Switch 2 editions, we've already seen it to a degree. But, you know, presumably we may keep seeing it, is that, you know, almost like a little bit of a substitute for the fact that they don't have that crutch that they had during the Switch generation of like, oh, we've got this whole bunch of games that we made that we think are quite good that very few people played because they were on Wii U. And now it's like, well, you don't have the very few people played angle so much with some of these Switch 1 games that you could go back to and, you know, kind of give a lick of paint or maybe extra content. Because that's what they do with Kirby and the Forgotten Land, for instance, is new content as well as the performance upgrades. But, you know, like I said, you're talking about games that sold, you know, I think in the case of Super Mario Brothers Wonder, what is it, like 15 million or something? You know, it's more than they were Wii U sold. So it's not exactly a perfect substitute in that regard, but maybe, who knows, you know, how many gaps there are in the software schedule that need to be filled in for the next, you know, year or two, before, maybe they get a bit more comfortable with, churning out Switch 2 games on that sort of technical level. So the potential is there. It's just, picking the best candidates.
Yeah, I mean, the upgrade packs, I'm just looking at their site right now. So what they have available, some of these are free. A lot of them are like, $10 American or whatever. But Pokemon Legends ZA, obviously, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Story of Seasons, Grand Bazaar, Shadow Labyrinth, No Man's Sky, Fantasy Life I, Sid Meier's Civilization 7, Rune Factory, Guardians of Azuma, Mario Party Jamboree, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and Breath of the Wild. So there's 11 of them out there. But that's a pretty interesting mix of games. I think really No Man's Sky kind of stands out to me as that's one of those obvious games that, that's one where it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Where it's not necessarily, and I'm trying to think of other games of its kind that are similar to this, in the sense that it's not necessarily predicated on being a graphical tour de force, but it's kind of like, having, like, say, for example, I talked about, draw distance being increased. Something like that could really help a game like No Man's Sky. I don't know what would be an equivalent of that that's out on Switch, or a game of that type where it's not necessarily hinging on graphical prowess.
Yeah, where it's not just about how pretty it looks, but it's like it's kind of just the core experience, right? Like I guess with No Man's Sky having that sense of scale and like how the worlds are populated and stuff is pretty essential to it. And maybe the compromises that he had on the original Switch hardware were such that you were losing a fair amount of that kind of immersive experience that the game was going for, and that you can get much more of that back if you have an enhancement like this that isn't just about it looks prettier. It's like it is more immersive. You're getting more of the intended experience there. So I think that's a kind of a good line of inquiry in terms of games that, could benefit the most, where it isn't just like, oh, well, yeah, this looks sharper, this looks, whatever, prettier in general. I mean, I guess, originally we were looking at maybe tackling this question before the Switch 2 launch, but I mean, there's some utility in looking at it now that it has come out, because we've got a little bit of a better idea. I mean, it's still a fluid situation. There's still, things going on behind the scenes with Nintendo, kind of addressing compatibility problems and all this, but the back compat situation and, what games are getting like passive improvements essentially is becoming clearer, the scope for that. And so, you've had games, for instance, I've already mentioned, like Bayonetta 3, which had an uncapped frame rate. And now, when you run that on Switch 2, it runs at a higher frame rate and much more stable, because it was uncapped, right? And so it can just tap into those extra resources and iron out all the kind of problems that it had before. So I guess what that leads you towards is where you get a Switch 2 edition is like, okay, well, we've got to do a deliberate upgrade to say, if there was a cap on resolution, if there was a cap on frame rates or, other elements that we're talking about there in terms of the amount of models on screen at once, the draw distance, we can go in there and change those caps now, so that, these are games that wouldn't necessarily get terribly much. They might get some things out of the passive kind of improvements that you get through the back play. But if we go in there and do a bespoke, version for Switch 2, where we can increase those caps, whatever they might be, whatever's most important to that experience, they could gain a lot from that. I think that those are the kinds of games that, I think are the best candidates. And I think, one of the ones, that certainly I've thought about a fair bit is Xenoblade 3. Not that that's the technically wonkiest Xenoblade, because that's definitely 2, but in terms of like something that I would be interested in going back to one day, 3 is the one that, I would be more interested in. And I think, there's probably some dynamic resolution stuff that could improve. I have not played it for any particular length of time on Switch 2. But I would have thought maybe there's some areas where the resolution adjusts downwards a bit on Switch 1 to cope, with everything that's going on that could be ironed out. But I think also it tops out at a lower resolution, right? I mentioned that, especially playing it on the OLED model that had the slightly bigger screen. It just looked kind of soft, there was a lot of great things going on with the art direction and the environments in that game, but it did look kind of soft. The potential there to kind of buff that up, get the resolution higher, and really appreciate the world that they kind of created there, I think would be something I'd be quite interested in. Because there's a lot of great things about that game, especially I think the DLC, The Future Redeemed. It's like a nice length for an RPG for me. It's about 30 hours or something. So I could see myself actually going back to that and playing it through, whereas, the main Xenoblade campaigns are so long. It's not that easy to talk yourself into the idea that you're going to manage it, because they are, sometimes very, very long.
Yeah. And I would think of something too, like righting the wrongs of the past. Like you could, I'd be surprised if they didn't patch Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which got lambasted when it was released for its performance.
Yeah, they have done that. And see, that is not listed as a Switch 2 edition because it is essentially just like a patch, right? It's not a retail. You can't buy it. It's not, but they have seemingly done quite a comprehensive amount of work on that in terms of, upscaling, the resolution is better. Yeah. I think we already mentioned the number of the draw distance and the amount of sort of models on screen at once. Loads of things have been improved about it. The kinds of things that you would maybe expect from a paid upgrade, but it's just in a patch essentially. So yeah, that is, I guess in some cases doesn't necessarily have to be something that they're going to sell on the eShop, and you could appreciate that a lot. But I guess you could look at that as a bit of a make good for what was, because they sold so many, they sold so many copies of it that inevitably meant that all its technical embarrassments were very, very easy for people to see and to share. And it was, and so I feel to some extent they were probably in the position of saying, let's just kind of fast track this and have it as a patch rather than a paid upgrade Switch 2 edition because of that negative, PR that they experienced. And it's years later, you can debate how much people are actually gonna, fully be aware of it or credit them for it or whatever. But, they probably feel like that was the right way to go. And that is a special case, isn't it? Relatively. I mean, there's not a lot that fit into that, but I mean, I think it only just shows, exactly what you were saying, John, in terms of they thought it was a very obvious candidate and they tackled it immediately.
Yeah, and certainly they wouldn't want to draw attention to that sordid chapter in that game's lifetime either. They wouldn't want to say, hey guys, remember how Pokemon Scarlet and Violet sucked? Yeah, we fixed it. Sorry. They would just kind of quietly.
Well,
quietly
I guess it's a good idea to get that out of the way before we get to, the Legends game that's going to be coming out in October. They just get people, some of the more kind of vocal parts of the Pokemon fan base, sort of placate them somewhat before we get to the next game, and maybe then they'll get more positive vibes and buzz around that than you would have got if it's like, hey, you still haven't fixed that game, because I mean people will play Pokemon games, for a very, very long time. It's not necessarily just something that maybe lots of people buy them again. So there's a whole range of different experiences that people have with them. But it's not all just people that play through, get to the Elite Four, put it down and never touch it again, a matter of weeks after it comes out. So there's probably, some wisdom in diffusing it before the next big Pokemon release. And that's going to be interesting, I think, in terms of just, how functional is that non-Switch 2 version? Like how does that sit next to the Switch 2 version? Does it feel like it's really like, wow, like you really need to play this on Switch 2, otherwise it's a mess. Yeah. And then the other part of it, I guess, is going to be like how long will it be until you get an exclusive Pokemon on Switch 2? Because again, historically, we've thought of them as being a bit reticent to release Pokemon exclusively on a Nintendo platform where there hasn't been like a cheaper option. Like for instance, the Switch Lite that was sort of accompanying Sword and Shield. So, that gave them an opportunity, presumably they felt like the price of entry is lower now. So it's a bit more kind of in alignment with the Pokemon audience, right? Historically, it's been cheaper hardware, games that cost less, all this kind of stuff. It's difficult to see. If we're thinking about Pokemon next year, you're doing the next big, new generation, for the anniversary of the original games and all that. I don't know whether, if you go Switch 2 exclusive, you'd be talking about, the console is not going to get a price cut, I don't think, by then. No. And the games, it costs a lot. Even the sort of lower tier ones is $70. So yeah, maybe they'll keep doing Switch 1 versions for a bit to kind of maintain that, kind of lower price of entry, even if they are wonky as all hell. Way that Scarlet and Violet were. But I guess the counterpoint to that is that, hey, Switch was still relatively expensive and the games were relatively expensive compared to Pokemon history. And some of the best-selling games in Pokemon history are on Switch, including Scarlet and Violet. So maybe they just won't worry about it as much as I'm supposing.
What about Musu games, like something like Fire Emblem Warriors? Do you think
do you think
those? I don't play those games, but do you think games like that could use a patch?
Well, it's an interesting case what we've seen so far. There's definitely some passive bonuses in those games. I think there's a really odd case with Hyrule Warriors, the definitive edition of the Wii U game, where like it originally ran like up to 1080 in handheld mode, even though it shouldn't. Because obviously it was a 720p screen on Switch, but it's like, well, now if you run it on Switch 2, you're getting that higher resolution because it was kind of always there. It's something really bizarre. I don't have that. I had Hyrule Warriors on Wii U. I didn't get the definitive edition on Switch, so I can't demonstrate that or test it for myself.
Well, one aspect that those games could use a patch for is that Karen and I played Fire Emblem Warriors. And, like couch co-op, split screen. And in the split screen mode, often not enough enemies would be on screen to actually achieve the objectives that the game was asking of us, like, oh, you have to kill, 100 or 200 of these enemies. And like we were just running out because only like 4 or 5 enemies were on screen at any time. Like it was, it was not the optimal Musu experience, let's just say. So maybe a patch is needed there. Like I haven't tried to play any of those games on the Switch 2, but I doubt that simply upping the processing power would fix that issue.
Yeah, I guess it depends exactly how they limit those things for performance, how hard that limit is. But yeah, assuming that does seem like the kind of thing you might have to go in and make particular changes to achieve, and presumably it'd be much more worthwhile because that is the kind of game that would seemingly benefit a great deal from local co-op. But on Switch, the performance. I mean, Age of Calamity. You have the single player. I mean, that thing was struggling altogether. I think, again, that has certainly benefited if you play it on Switch 2. I just did a little bit of that round about the first couple of days after I got the Switch 2, and it seemed a lot more, stable. It did. But yeah, again, there's more benefits probably that you could achieve by having a Switch 2 edition kind of scenario. But of course, in that case, we've got the Age of Imprisonment game coming towards the end of the year, right? So that's the other part of this equation that we're talking about when you're looking at there's what we want to happen, and then there's like what we think is could happen based on fitting in gaps in the release schedule, and in that case, you would think it's going to be a lot more a case of like, there's passive benefits of playing through back compat on Switch 2, and there's a new game, so look forward to that. That's probably what we would get. But I do really like Fire Emblem Warriors. I didn't get to 3 Hopes, but I think I was just a bit Warriors out after Age of Calamity at that point.
Yeah,
but
me too.
The original, the Fire Emblem Warriors was, I think pretty cool in terms of you just had that little bit, soft, kind of not anything particularly high level or anything, but just those little bit of integration of like Fire Emblem, kind of weapon triangles, and, you get to like order off units to go and take a particular position and all that. It's it blended quite well with the gameplay I already knew from Hyrule Warriors, and it just added something to it, and I think that worked out pretty well. So a cool game, but not one I'm expecting to get an upgrade of this kind.
But since we're on the topic of multiplayer co-op split screen games, like all of those could also benefit obviously from something like Game Share. So that's something I wouldn't mind seeing patched into all those Musou games. But also the one that's not going to happen that I thought of was Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3. Remember when Nintendo published that?
Yeah, no, I believe I saw some again. Take this for what it's worth, because you could get all sorts of like Imagine things, or maybe there's a bit of Game of Telephone going on, but I feel like I saw something somewhere that suggested maybe that is getting some of those passive benefits of playing on Switch 2 at least. But yeah, again,
but of course the benefit I would want is really the Game Share, because I believe that the issue with this game, the reason why I didn't buy it is because the best co-op experience that you could have required like 2 copies of the game and 2 Switches, right? Like it was a kind of ad hoc, local wireless game, and so not so much a couch co-op in front of your TV game. But if they added Game Share, then okay, like I can buy 1 copy. And Karen can play, on the Switch or the Switch 2, like that would actually be perfect. It's probably not going to happen because I doubt that, I don't think Nintendo thinks that they would have a lot to gain from doing that.
Yeah, it's probably
it's not as if the game is readily available, on store shelves. So, and also the Marvel thing has lost its luster a little bit. So, yeah, it's too bad. But I mean, like, I could rattle off, like, if we're also looking for potential new DLC, I mean, there's a bunch of that's games the thing. That come to mind.
I mean, what Adolf raised about Mario Wonder is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because we had a number of games at the end there of Switch where it's kind of like, okay, this could totally have DLC. They probably would be doing DLC, but they're moving all of focus onto Switch 2, right? The Switch successor at that point. It's like you kind of feel like this would be ripe for it, but it's time to move on, kind of thing. But then what you see with the Kirby and the Forgotten Lands in particular kind of makes you feel like, well, yeah, maybe this, something like what's described there with like, challenge levels or something for Super Mario Brothers Wonder, Pikmin 4, for instance, maybe,
yes.
Any of these games that came out towards the end, all of a sudden you think maybe there could be, some fresh content for those games to go along with a full, kind of Switch 2 edition paid upgrade scenario. So yeah, I mean, that definitely, you know, I mean, I think that there's more room for things out of Super Mario Brothers Wonder, you know, new Wonder effects, you know, they could have come up with, like, stuff like, I feel like there was plenty of mileage that they could have got out of that, so that would have been a candidate for sure. I mean, it'll be interesting with Forgotten Land how substantial that actually feels, because what we've seen so far, you know, there was some stuff at the Treehouse Live broadcast that followed the Switch 2 event and all that. It does it looks a bit like the kind of thing that you often get in Kirby games, you know, where it's like a post-game, like, remix of stuff that's already there. You know, with this whole kind of like, okay, was it like a comet or something has hit
everything's icy now.
Yeah, and everything's kind of, so yeah, that's like, it does seem like it's a kind of post-game remix scenario, which is, you know, I've enjoyed some of those kinds of modes that have been in past Kirby games, and I'm pretty big fan of that game in general. So I'm kind of looking forward, you know, with a fair bit of interest to see, you know, if that can actually deliver. But yeah, whether, you know, is that the cap? Is that the most that we could get, like remix type stuff, or could you get something that feels more substantial, like, you know, kind of, you know, slightly different kind of game, but, you know, like new Super Luigi U felt like back there, which, you know, was a remix of a kind. You know, they kept all the overworld map, and they kept the, you know, kind of level themes and everything, but, you know, you had this, and it was like, okay, the levels are going to be shorter, more time pressure, and, you know, kind of redesigned with that kind of paradigm. You know, it's, yeah, interesting to contemplate some of that stuff. And that kind of changes, yeah, the criteria again, doesn't it? Because there is, okay, we're not just concentrating so much on the technical stuff anymore. We're thinking about, you know, the game design element. And I guess for me, I would say Pikmin 4, it would be interesting if you could have more stuff that had that old school Pikmin time pressure element more in it, I guess.
Definitely.
I would say if there's, I mean, I loved it. I really did enjoy the game very, very much. But if there's one thing that you felt like it could have had more of, it's that. I would, as someone who very much enjoyed the games that came before it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I mean, Pikmin 3 had DLC. It was one of the first Nintendo games to get DLC, wasn't it? It was not usual for
no, that's right. Yeah, I mean, DLC. I guess like Mario Kart 8, I think, was another one that was relatively kind of early on in that process, but I think that was after Pikmin 3, right?
Yeah, yeah. So so I feel like it would make sense for Pikmin 4 to get the same kind of DLC at least. You know, some challenge levels, some Christmas pizza crab weird mission, you know, that doesn't exist in the main game, but that they conjure up in the DLC, and it's like, what the fuck is happening here? Like I would take that definitely. I had some ideas that maybe don't. Okay, so how about this? Because Adolf opened the door for like Wii U games. How about a Switch 2 patch for Super Mario 3D World? Perhaps one where you don't touch the fucking running speed of the characters so that it doesn't break the fucking game. I would love that.
Because that is another game. That is another game that they've basically, I think it's just Bowser's Fury, right? Bowser's Fury has been updated because in portable mode, which is how I played pretty much all of Bowser's Fury, it was capped at 30. Right, the frame rate. So basically, I think that among the changes, I don't think that was the only, because of game share and some other things, but that one of the changes they made was, you know, removing the cap, I guess, so it could go up to 60 on Switch 2. But this is an interesting, this is, you know, the true, you know, fidelity edition to the Wii U game of like, you know, actually, let's have it be balanced the way it was, before. That's an interesting notion.
And of course, Mario Kart 8, same joke. Don't add like 2 items, and also it would be very, very funny to get a special edition of Mario Kart 8 on the Switch 2, you know, alongside Super Mario, Mario Kart World.
Just go back to that non-functional battle mode.
Yeah. I don't. It would almost be, you know, Nintendo's ultimate flex. Like, yeah, we know you're going to buy this again. We know. Like, don't, like, I know, just buy it again. Take this up-res and let's go. I was thinking maybe seeing Shadow Labyrinth on this list. I mean, I was thinking maybe Metroid Dread, just because, I mean, I looked at Shadow, I was like, what did they do to Shadow Labyrinth? And it's like, well, it's just better FPS and graphics.
Yeah, because that's an upcoming game, right? So, so you presumably we're going to get quite a lot of these cross-platform kind of scenarios. But yeah, I mean, with Dread, I mean, it seemed to me like they didn't, they didn't overstretch things. There wasn't a lot of areas there where you felt like it was straining too hard against the software. But, again, we talked about this a little bit, when I was talking about the Splatoon 3 update, which again was not a paid update. That's just something that they've done presumably to try and, maintain engagement in the game, and so that people are still playing it when they, move over to the new system, and, keep it kind of going so that people, Switch 1 players and Switch 2 players are both kind of playing against each other and everything's playing nice. But like, definitely, with some of the stuff with the screen, the response time thing, how like the motion's not that clean looking and stuff, and that definitely seems to suffer more when it's upscaling, that lower res content from Switch 1. Probably, it's not so much that you'd be getting a huge upgrade on what the Dread experience was like on, your OLED Switch, if that's how you play, because it pretty much came out together, right? The Dread and the OLED model. But it would help you kind of mitigate some of the issues that you might, because that's the thing. I can imagine if you played that, on your OLED, back when it launched, and then you boot it up on Switch 2. Again, depends how, eyesight, how sort of sensitive you are to some of these things, but you just aesthetic preferences, but it might be like, I don't know whether this actually looks as good. It looks kind of smeary, looks kind of upscaled, because it is, you went from, being designed for that 720 screen to being upscaled on a 1080 screen. It might be, just nice to mitigate some of those things, because like I said, with Splatoon 3, it definitely did. It looks, you can still, the screen is what it is. It can't change that, but it looks a hell of a lot better with that update. So, just some of those types of things would be pretty valuable, I think.
Yeah. Anything else anybody can think of?
Well, a couple of cap situations that I thought of that could, where it's like, okay, let's change a cap to make it better. Or at least I think I see, my technical knowledge is essentially non-existent, so I'm guessing here, but Kirby Star Allies, was capped, which is, a little bit unusual for a Kirby game. Although I guess Forgotten Land was too, but that was a 3D game. So that could use with, kind of being, and also, I mean, the reason presumably it was capped is because it was kind of a multiplayer focused game. So it could get pretty busy with, everybody kind of, popping off like attacks and abilities and in a boss fight or something. And to be fair, I can think of boss fights in that game where even with the cap, the frame rate dropped. So that could use with, I presume it may benefit a little bit from playing just on Switch 2 passively, but I would have thought it's still going to run up against that 30 frames per second cap. So that's one that could use with. Another I could think of, is Yoshi's Woolly World. Yoshi's Crafted World, I should say. Yoshi's Crafted World is a game that, has this very meticulously constructed, to look handmade environment, right? But then the resolution is so low, I do think it kind of diminishes how much you appreciate the detail that they put into it. There's this assiduously constructed kind of fake, paper craft and all this other stuff. And then the resolution is at a level that you don't appreciate that, I think, as much as you might be able to. And again, based on what I've seen of Yoshi's Crafted World looking on Switch 2, I should say, it might be a bit like the resolution. Again, there might be dynamic adjustments that it doesn't have to make anymore, but that target level that he just can't go above is just too low, really, and so that would be a good one to increase. And I would assume the same would probably go, although it's a different aesthetic, for the Princess Peach Showtime game, because that's good feel and technically, I think, pretty similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one that I just thought of was Echoes of Wisdom. That has a pretty hitchy frame rate.
Oh yeah, they've done that one as well. Yeah, not as a Switch 2 edition again, and it shows exactly why you thought of that one, because it was kind of, something that people noticed, and so they were quick to rectify. And Link's Awakening, for that matter, it wasn't something that bothered me too much, I think, because it wasn't as bad in portable mode. But yeah, especially for playing on television, it sounds like, they basically just straighten that out. And yeah, again, those are the kind of the ones, the low hanging fruit in this scenario, right? The uncapped game, where there's something like that.
They were able to smooth it out. All right. Let's just see here. I think, we'll take a break here. And then we have 2 or 3 more emails. We'll see how it goes, see how the conversation goes. And we will see everybody on the other side of the break. And we are back on Radio Free Nintendo, continuing our run through our email backlog. And I think for the next one, just check here. Greg, could you please read the next email?
Sure. So Brendan writes, "Hey guys, so I've heard you all talk about F-Zero GX for years, and now I finally have a chance to give it a try, and I'm absolutely baffled by how anyone is supposed to play this game. For context, I've played Fast RMX a decent amount, and played F-Zero 99 enough to place third a few times, though I never got a first place finish. So, I'm by no means an expert about these kinds of games, but I feel absolutely hopeless trying to play GX. Am I missing something? It feels impossibly fast, and I'm just immediately steering into magnetized walls. I've seen some people say online that you need to calibrate the joystick to be as insensitive as possible to play the game. Is that really necessary? Any tips you guys have for a beginner would be much appreciated. Thanks."
Yeah, well,
our resident F-Zero GX expert?
I guess, more or less. It's been a while. But yeah, I guess you don't absolutely need to, at least until you unlock the Diamond Cup. You don't need to recalibrate, because I never recalibrated my stick. And yeah, so I managed to unlock the Diamond Cup. But once I hit the Trident track, I talked about it last week. It was just basically like, oh my god, how do I even survive staying on the course? It seemed impossible with certain ships. So eventually it might be necessary, yes, to recalibrate. But I think you only need to do it once, right? And you only need, well, or at least as long as you don't switch controllers. I just tried it. It does seem to give you slightly better control. I tried it on the Switch 2 portable mode, so on the Joy-Con 2. I assume that maybe the travel of the stick is different if you're using a controller Pro and playing on a TV. So maybe like you'll need to recalibrate if you switch from one to the other. But yeah, like it does seem to help a little bit. But one thing I will say is that F-Zero is not an easy game, and I think that one thing that might help is living in 2003 and not having terribly many games to play. And so
I thought you were going to say living in Mute City.
But, being pretty stubborn about like trying to enjoy the game that you just bought. And yeah, eventually, gradually, the tracks enough that you don't necessarily need to think about what you're doing. You just do it. And so if you can reach that point, that can only come from lots and lots of repetition. So, this is not.
I don't think you're actually making him feel any better, Guillaume.
Right? Yeah, like this. It might sound like I'm just like this is the long way of saying get good. But
that's what I was gonna say.
But I mean, like, I don't think, like, it is a hard game to learn. There's a few things, like I gave the trick, like, if you can manage to not hit the walls, or worse, when there are no walls, like, to not just fall off the freaking track. Like, if you can reach that point. I did give some tricks about, defeat your rival so that you don't need to finish first on every track to finish a cup. But I guess alongside that, maybe like before that, learn when not to boost and when to boost. And that's pretty easy. Like you boost at the beginning of a pretty straight part of track, and you don't boost any other time. Like if there's going to be a turn in the distance, you don't want to be boosting. If there are like too many cars on the screen, maybe you don't want to be boosting. I don't know, unless you're going to pull off one of those like boost and then spin tricks that I talked about last week. Like maybe like save that for later. But the one of the quirks of the going fast in F-Zero is that when you boost at a certain point, your ship does lose control. Like it catches in the air. And at that point, like, the handling is completely different from when you're going at a quote-unquote regular speed. So I guess, like, you want to know when to actually turn and when to boost. Like, if it looks like you're going to need to turn at some point, yeah, don't be boosting.
Well, and the other thing with boosting, I guess, as well, is like how, and this is part of getting to know the tracks, as you already mentioned, is how far have you got until there's a pit lane to replenish your health?
Yes.
Because that's the other problem, is that even if it might seem like an apt time to boost, if you're going to leave yourself where it's like, well, you know what, if you get crunched by another, car, or, a bunch of cars all turn in at the same point or something before you get there, then even what seemed like a sensible place to boost might not be, because you're going to die before you get to the pit lane. So you got that element of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another thing is that, like, so James already covered don't do the garage thing. Don't try to build your own ship, because they never work. The other part of that is that you start with 4 unlocked ships, but there are, I think, 30 ships that you can play as, that you can drive or pilot or whatever.
Eventually there's more. Like there's yes. All of them from X, but then there are AX, the arcade version. There's more characters and crafts to go with them. And I don't know how fancy those unlocks are now. I know I did unlock them back then. Mm-hmm. I just can't remember how he did it, but yeah, eventually there's even more. But yeah, it was a little bit of a shock to me to see just how few they give you to start with.
Right. It's just like the original 4 from the Super NES game, I guess. So they all handle pretty drastically different. So you do want to unlock them and try them out and see, like, oh, maybe like this one actually kind of manages to still be steerable even when I use a boost. So, like you'll find one maybe that fits your piloting style.
I guess like the grip rating and the weight of the craft are probably the biggest variables in that particular equation, right?
Yeah, I would just focus initially not on winning, but just like surviving, and keep doing that. Like try again, like just eventually react to the tracks instinctively, and like then like start really boosting. Of course, so. When you're at the end of the track, when it's the last stretch, go crazy with a boost. There's no reason for you not to boost. In fact, and I wish I had the presence of mind to record the video, but I actually crashed. I ran out of energy. I touched something, and my ship just was exploding in the air. But it was still, had that forward momentum. And I crossed the finishing line. I was first. I was dead. but I still won. So it's not over until it's over, you know? Like, throughout a cup, as I said, like, your rival might just faceplant and lose 100 points for that cup, you know, in one go. And so you still have a chance to beat them over the totality of the cups. But also, like, within one single race, one single track, just give it your all until the very end, and don't restart before you've actually seen, like, the retired thing, or, you know, like, there's always a chance that you're still alive, that you made it.
Well, and I think specifically, it's really kind of a systematic weakness in the AI, is that they don't regard the end of the race the way that you do, in the sense that, like, they don't seem to demonstrate any urgency about it. Means nothing to, like, you can't take that extra boost energy with you, you know, home. Like, you know, right. Like, you just gun it, you know, to the last, you know, drop when you see the finish line, right? They don't act like that. So you will often pass a bunch of them right at the end if you know, at least get the chance to, you know, if you're not crawling to the finish line with nothing left in the tank. So that's always, you know, you kind of expect to gain a bunch of places right at the end. So it's definitely worth, you know, kind of, not being too quick to restart and thinking, you know what, maybe you can kind of pull a good finish out of the fire here late on. But also, with regard to the practicing element of it, I think if you unlock a cup, you can practice all of the tracks in it, even if you've not really played that cup or beaten it, right? So, and the thing about the practice mode is, you can control, like, certain variables about are there other cars or, you know, this kind of thing. But the biggest part of it is that if you, as you mentioned, right, especially as it goes on, you get sections of track where there's no barriers, right? And so it's quite easy to go flying off when you're at ridiculous speeds, and especially with this whole issue of maybe the controls are too sensitive or whatever. You go flying off, and then in the real thing, you're dead, right? And then you use up one of your retries, but, you know, there's no Lackey 2 to come and get you, you know, that's just it. But when you're practicing, like, you do essentially have, like, the you know, sci-fi equivalent of Lackey 2. This is like UFO looking thing just comes and beams you out, and you can go, because that's, you know, it gives you the chance to, you know, keep, like, okay, I screwed that up. I need to take that turn slower, or I need to do this, or, you know, boost here, not there. All these, you can kind of iron all that out in the practice and then take that into the cup for real, you know, much more so. And yeah, that's probably going to be in the, I mean, I would love to think, you know, as I imagine a lot of people would, it's just like, look, I just go in there, I just ball out and everything's going to be good, but it's not. You know, it is a pretty, I talked about it last week, like, that it's, even for me, even somebody who played it to death in the mid-aughts, and it took a while because, like, I can remember I didn't beat some of the most, you know, the highest difficulties on things until, like, a couple of years later. And that, like, as you already mentioned, that's when more time, fewer options, more stubborn, better eyesight, better reflexes, all of that stuff, you know, was in my favour.
Everything you've lost.
Yeah, and even then, it was a, like, years-long process before it was like, I have exhausted this, I've beaten everything in this game the way that I did much quicker in sort of F-Zero X years earlier. So
I feel like it's almost like a first-person shooter where I swear there's some people that are just better at first-person shooters, that I am. I mean, I used to play with people where they would just pick it up. They'd be like, oh yeah, I'm like the highest rank that you can possibly get in, like, online. And I'm like, there's no way I will ever hit that. I have a ceiling. Your ceiling is way higher than mine. But would you say that F-Zero GX is the Dark Souls of racing? Is the Dark Souls of racing?
I don't know. I've not put that, you know, enormous amounts of times at the Dark Souls, to kind of say. But yeah, I do, you know, definitely at least getting the practice in those races, because like, the worst that could happen, right, is, like, say for instance you had a really nice start to a cup that you haven't beaten before, right? You might get, you know, 4 races in or something, and you finish really well, and then it's like you get to that last track and you've never played it before, and then it's just retire shit out, and you've wasted it. right?
Yeah, I feel like you can't really cheese F-Zero GX. There's no part of it that you can cheese.
The closest thing to cheesing it is that boosting at the line, right? In the sense that it's just, I guess, it's not so much that like you're cheesing it; it's that your opponents aren't. Like that's really what gives you that kind of opportunity to gain places a lot at the end. But like I said, definitely, at least acquaint yourself with the tracks on especially the more advanced cups before the back end of the cup before you make a real run at trying to beat it. That definitely makes plenty of sense. I mean, the issue with the sensitivity thing again, it's kind of patchy. I guess, I can't verify this stuff for myself, but it seems there's a possibility anyway that the GameCube kind of app in general is like over-tuned or something, you know what I mean? Like the analog sensitivity that you've got for all the GameCube games on NSO for Switch 2 is a bit too much, but I guess, if you're playing Wind Waker, it's probably not that big of a deal, right? Whereas, with GX, it is more of a deal. But, it's got this in-game calibration tool that could, you could help, you could balance it out. And so it just comes to a place where you're good with it. At least, I don't know whether they might patch the, basic kind of analog sensitivity at some point because, if you go back to N64, when that first came to expansion pack on Switch NSO, it did, they went through some adjustments, some things that needed ironing out. You could think of like, I think, input lag is still something that's a bit of it's an issue with emulation in general, right? It's an extra layer of stuff going on with the software that means that it's not going to be as responsive, right? So there's that. Then there's the question of whether Nintendo Switch Online emulation is as efficient as it could be in that regard. And certainly I think some of the N64 games, early ones, got a little bit better, eventually. But still, there's some amount of lag in there. So, another thing that could help maybe, because if you have a wireless controller on top of that, well, that's even more lag, right? So maybe, playing with the Joy-Con on in portable mode or playing with a wired controller when docked might just reduce the lag issue a little bit. But, because again, when it's a game that's this fast and intense, some of those little, lags and delays that generally aren't a huge deal do presumably come closer to being, more of an issue. When I was playing F-Zero GX originally back in the day, that was on a CRT with original hardware, and I don't think I even used the Wavebird. I used the wired controller with the rumble.
Like a man.
But now that you mentioned wired controllers, that does remind me. So, did Nintendo? I guess Nintendo did make an official adapter, huh? Like for GameCube controllers.
Yeah,
for the Switch.
They did. They did the Smash one.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's not really possible to find anymore because I feel like I went and looked for an adapter and it was all third-party stuff.
Right, yeah. They did it on Wii U as well, didn't they? That's where I got I had an adapter for the Wii U, which does still work on Switch, but I don't know whether they sold another one for Switch. They probably did because they sold those a different Smash GameCube controller than the one that was on Wii U, right? I have it. It's like the Smash logo is different on it than it was on the Wii U one. So they probably did, but yeah, how available it is now, I don't know. But yeah, so I've got wired, GameCube controllers that I could use, see if that helps any. But, like I said, that's one side of it, right? And yeah, it's possible that some of this stuff could get a little bit better, but it's probably only so much better that it can get, like the emulation side.
Right. Yeah, but anyway, good luck, Brendan. I don't know. Like, I feel like F-Zero GX has aged well and is a great game, and so yeah, I would recommend again. Like, keep trying. I don't know if there's any, like, wouldn't underestimate the power of memorizing the tracks. Like, it's happening even like with like I think we're all playing Mario Kart World at the moment, and it wasn't that long ago. It can't have been that long ago because the Switch 2 was only released like 3 weeks ago. But like, I felt like, oh, I'm never going to do the wall jumps. It feels like, like it seems impossible. And now the more that I play these tracks, the more I notice like, oh yeah, these shortcuts, I could grind here, I could grind there. And like the wall riding almost happens automatically when I'm in certain levels, like the DK, the first one with the giant, mechanical DK throwing barrels at you. There's a section where
the spaceport,
the spaceport. Thank you. And like, there's this part where like there's a jump and there's a wall that's just slightly at an angle, and it's very obviously made so that you go ahead and you ride that wall. So something that didn't seem really quite like that seemed out of reach not that long ago is now like, yeah, of course I do it without even thinking. So it's a little bit like that with F-Zero GX.
That's the nature. It's the nature of all racing games, really. Right in the end, is learning the tracks and devising more efficient strategies of how to get around there quicker. It's just with F-Zero, it's got that kind of harder edge, with the fact that you just if you can go off the track and it's retry, you don't get just a simple time penalty. And just everything else about it, right? How fast you can go, how severe it is if you get a corner wrong and just get crunched and lose all your speed. Especially if again, you've got the whole acceleration top speed trade off, that you pick, along the grid. I mean, some of it I think is dependent on the car you pick as well, but you pick on the where on the graph you want to be, and if it's a relatively kind of straightforward track, you might think, let's go for the top speed, right? Which is all well and good, but if you get like crunched really hard on the first lap before boost power comes into play, which is a good crutch for getting back up to speed fast, you can lose a lot of time just waiting for that speed to build back up if you've gone hard on top speed. So there's a lot that goes into it with F-Zero, but that's why it is really satisfying when you feel you're just getting better and doing stuff you couldn't do before.
Yeah, I feel it really rewards knowing the track's cold more than other racers, more so than like in something like Mario Kart. Most Mario Kart games, it helps if you know the track's cold, but in GX it's almost it's mandatory.
The big thing with Mario Kart is the big thing with Mario Kart is some of those extra things, right? Where it's just like, I mean, it depends on the game because there've been differences, with some of this stuff, but knowing where it's like, if I've got a mushroom at this point, there's a jump I can make or a corner I can cut across that just really, saves an enormous amount of time. And so, having that ability to not just like, okay, there's all these items and it's chaotic and there's huge amounts of random elements, but that knowledge if you get lucky enough to get the opportunity to put it into action, can make a big difference. And so it still comes into play, but it tends to be a bit more, kind of, not as prominent and not as, upfront as F-Zero.
Yeah. So, Brendan, the G is for get good, I think. I think that's how we would wrap that up. All right. The next email here we have is from Simtendo, who writes, Nintendo now has an excellent distribution platform for its classic games in the Nintendo Classic Game libraries. It makes them super accessible to NSO subscribers at least. But what's next? Do you think Nintendo would ever start releasing new games for these platforms? I'm talking about a new NES or GBA game, a brand new SNES release, or even an unreleased GBC game that was never quite finished. What about retro remakes of newer franchises? Imagine an SNES Splatoon campaign in 2D, or even a sequel to previously forgotten franchise like an expansion of F-Zero GX with new tracks. In my head, these games would be limited to the tech they had in the system's prime, but just new games. A great way to fill gaps between software, and it would be a fantastic prospect for enthusiasts. Do you think Nintendo would ever do this? If not, why not? What would you like to see? Nintendo shouldn't confine themselves to a single console? Why not expand their own timeless ecosystem? That's an interesting question. I could see this happening in certain cases. And in fact, I would argue that maybe not from Nintendo themselves, but from other developers, this has already happened. Like I think of, kind of Capcom with something like Dark Void, for example, how they had that kind of demake. There's that
Dark Void Zero, right? That was the bit that actually seemed to be positively received in the end. I
exactly, more so than the actual game
I didn't
cost millions more to make.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, obviously, this is something, that you see, we used the closing music a while back for Eartheon, the Genesis, Mega Drive shoot 'em up that's coming from Yuzo Koshiro, which is, will run on an actual Genesis, but, he's going to be on Switch. It's something, people are going to pay for, but it's like essentially just a new game for that hardware that, will take advantage of the fact that, even though you've got all those constraints there that are, going to affect what you can do with the tools today and so forth, there's still like more that you could get out of, those platforms than people could back when they were current. In terms of Nintendo themselves, I think it would be more likely that it would exist outside of the Nintendo Classics apps themselves and more as a Nintendo Online like kind of perk, or the way that F-Zero 99 exists basically.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it would something that if it wasn't going to be something that people just pay for up front, which would be like Eartheon or all these other various like indie games that are very much wearing the clothing of being a Super Nintendo game, an NES game, whatever it might be, and in some cases like actually are. But so they could go that route, but I think it might be more likely where it's like, okay, no, this is like a Nintendo Online, we've seen Super Mario 35, F-Zero 99, and it's kind of like taking, an old game and giving it new functionality or expanding it in some way and having that as an online subscriber kind of reward. That's probably the likeliest thing they could do that's closest to what's being talked about here. I don't see them going closer to that. I'd kind of like to be wrong, because I think it would be interesting, certainly in some cases, but, because maybe, that kind of lower budget, development environment might be the only hope we have for some of their less commercially powerful, brands to come back. And indeed, that's kind of why, we talk about F-Zero 99, right? That is like the only new F-Zero thing that we've had for, so many years. I kind of feel like that's probably as close as we're going to get.
Yeah, Nintendo, they tend to not like to revisit ideas or rehash what in their opinion is rehashing an idea. So that's why you see stuff like F-Zero 99, because they look at that, they seem to look at things from a standpoint of, why would I just do another version of F-Zero? We want to inject something new, So, in other words, they wouldn't look at, there were 3 editions of this NES version of the game. Let's just make another NES version of the game. They see that as, well-trodden ground at this point. Not something that they need to do. Kind of been there, done that. So that's why I think smaller developers, are more apt to do that, just because it's more of their bread and butter. I think of, I think of some of these demake type games. Nintendo doesn't have to do that. They've already done it. It's not new for them. So, I don't know. I would love to see them do it. I mean, certainly if there was,
obviously,
if some of these series were continued, I mean, I would buy them for sure.
Well, this is the point, right? I mean, we talked about Dark Void Zero. It must have been around about that time. Mega Man 9, right? Which led to Mega Man 10 as well. And the thing about that again is like, well, at that time, maybe that was one of the only kind of ways that that kind of classic Mega Man style could come back, right? Because that's what Capcom were kind of willing to allocate to it, and they did it, and it was, well received. And, it ultimately, they did 10, they kind of took a break. And then when they did 11, they didn't go that route again. They actually, did something with, more contemporary kind of polygonal graphics, but, with the side scrolling gameplay. And then obviously we haven't had anything since. So it's like, I think, that kind of shows you some of the potential there of like, this is a way that you can have something back that maybe otherwise you wouldn't get back. And, of the, kind of classic Mega Man games that I've played, I think 9 is one of the best. It's very good. So, just it is possible to kind of go back in time and do a really cool version of, a template that existed, even one, in that particular case where, they did 6 of them on NES, they did a lot. So you might think, did they just completely, run that dry? But I think, 9 kind of proved that you could do something good there. So it shows the potential, but I kind of feel somewhat similar to you, John. I just don't know whether Nintendo would go like to something that overt, in that regard, even if it is a way to bring something back that otherwise wouldn't. Like if it's something that's like, okay, we can use this to sell our online service, and it, because it's like, oh, well, they didn't have online multiplayer back then, did they? They didn't have all these players back then. So this is something new you're bringing to it. Like, they have done that with Super Mario, 35 and with F-Zero 99. I could see them doing maybe something analogous with other stuff, but a full on Mega Man 9, where type of thing for that kind of series is just, probably a bit outside their wheelhouse.
Yeah, and you've got already kind of like hobbyists, or, like amateur game developers making their own NES games or Genesis games. Like they are into trying to program for old hardware and trying to wring everything out of it. But like you can't really quite imagine Nintendo having its staff learning how to program for the NES. Like it would be kind of a waste of their talent, and their, like, that's not what they're there for. That's not what they're at Nintendo for. They're there to make new games for the latest hardware, because that's the hardware that they're trying to sell.
Yeah, I could maybe see something happening like an old school Nintendo developer wants to come out of retirement for one last mission. To speak in terms that Greg can understand. Like, they just want, like, they're not making games anymore, but they want to do one more NES game just for fun. I could see Nintendo greenlighting that because they have nothing to lose. But you're absolutely right. I mean,
and
Nintendo
the terrorists have their wife.
right.
Yeah.
And I mean, because you look at it, I mean, Nintendo is a business, right? So they're, they look at it like, why would we spend these engineering resources to be just like, cold capitalists about it? Why would we spend these on something that's going to have such a small audience and is going to make such a small amount of money? We're not going to have our best people on that. We're going to have people that, we probably wouldn't get anything out of otherwise, but they just feel like devoting something to a project. Yeah. So.
And like in terms of now we have online, like the Nintendo has been doing other stuff with their old style of games. Like there's Championship, whatever that was called, the cart
NES Championship.
NES Championship, but also probably more importantly, Super Mario Maker, which is like that's what they're gonna do. Like, okay, like this is sure you can have your experience of playing old Mario levels, but you're gonna make them. But here's the game that we're gonna make for you is a game where you get to make Mario games. So I think that's more that type of stuff that we can expect from them, and not so much like here's an old Mario game in the style of Mario 3. What if Mario 3 had the feather as an item? Well, now but actually, like we've known since Super Mario Brothers Advance, whichever,
Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Brothers 3.
Thank you.
The e-reader stuff, yeah. That's true.
Exactly. So, yeah, like so they did that with the e-reader, and now I think that they've decidedly moved on to something else,
No, I don't. I mean, it's one of these things where the magic words opportunity cost loom large, right? Because it's not just like, well, could this be a small scale success? We probably could be, and there's things that happen in the industry that can, show the likelihood of that, in particular cases. But for Nintendo, a lot of the time it's like, well, yeah, but we have the potential, even some of our kind of lesser games have the potential to sell millions in terms of, we don't spend as much time on them. We don't spend as much, on the development budget, but, they could still generate this much revenue. So it is difficult to justify, I would imagine, setting aside development resources for certain things. And yet, for all that being true, you get some strange things like, the Famicom Detective Club coming back and then having a new one of those as new games, retail games. I get a lot of that has to be put down to the fact that, Sakamoto's been around forever and is still there and can pull some strings and, whatever, get things done. So I guess if somebody really wanted some of these things to be the case, perhaps it could happen, but, as a general matter, it doesn't kind of fit particularly well into their kind of structure. I guess you might be more likely if it was a case of, an indie or other, third party developer of some description, kind of pitched them on it and they said yes. Like that might be a little bit more plausible, I guess, but still, less than, very likely, to say the least. But I mean, in terms of things you'd like to see, like you've got to, if we're going to say that, first of all, I mean, this isn't even like a new thing. The F-Zero X expansion kit that was on the DD, I've always been interested, in what that was actually like, trying to make, F-Zero tracks and just what that added to F-Zero X. So, I mean, a DD section to the expansion pack doesn't seem that likely.
No, but, probably not.
Who could say, but, I guess, maybe you could have something that, kind of, is sort of adjacent to F-Zero 99 itself, where it's like, okay, now, F-Zero Maker, we're going to have some tracks you can make or something, even if it's just using the 2D graphics. But yeah, the stuff that's like really unlikely to come back at this point. I mean, I think Star Fox kind of fits into that category. It would be kind of cool. It'd be kind of cool if you had like a kind of a Star Fox sequel that was like maybe theoretically could run on the Super Nintendo. Maybe you cheat and it couldn't actually do it, but it was like a low poly, aesthetic, right? It was like deliberately very, kind of in that early, Star Fox 1 and 2 kind of look, but you just, did something different with the gameplay in some way, because it just doesn't really seem like lavishing some sort of big, budget or any kind of budget on a Star Fox game is likely to be very productive from a commercial point of view. So the only way I can see it getting, furthered at this point, unless it's just like Miyamoto takes a break from producing films and overseeing theme parks to insist that it happens. The only way I could see it is if it was some small scale, very retro style thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at it from the standpoint of what the ceiling is for stuff like this, both in terms of who's willing to work on it and who's willing to play it and buy it, most importantly. And I just think now it's that stuff, no matter how you feel about it, how much affection you have for these types of games, for this kind of retro fare, it is niche, right?
Yeah.
And also barriers to entry, like the NSO subscription period is a huge barrier to entry. So it's the more niche stuff that you have, or the more investment that you have, kind of in terms of development, it makes less sense the more paywalled it is. So I don't really think that. I think our answer is no. You will not see much of this at all. But who knows? Nintendo tends to surprise you every once in a while. They tend to do some goofy stuff.
Well, especially if things are a bit troubled. That's when you get your most kind of Nintendo's just like, okay, let's try something. Let's just try whatever ideas we got, right? The kind of thing. We've seen that at times, when things have not been so hot with the GameCube generation, with the Wii U generation in particular. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's early on. We switched to the immediate, like the launch numbers are historically good, all that kind of stuff. But we can't be too sure how well it's going to go from here. There might come a time where they maybe need to kind of freshen things up or do something, but it doesn't seem too likely just at this point, does it?
Yep. All right. Let's move on to the final email in the queue here. Guy, could you read this one from Dragon Power Meowth?
Sure. Dragon Power Meowth writes, Hey, our effing boys. I've been playing Super Princess Peach recently. That one's not getting digitally re-released, and we don't need to relitigate why. I'm not going to stop you if you want to for the benefit of listeners half our age. But there's a perfectly good engine right there. Pretend Nintendo still makes dual-screen handhelds, or better, is willing to listen to reason and map the emotions and minigames of Super Princess Peach to regular controls. I'm tasking you with giving in to your xenophobia and using that to make a game that the Western Nintendo branches will be proud to sell in 2025. No disrespect meant to Elite Beat agents or anything. That holds up even without the baggage of why not both? Love, parentheses, and the snow, because there are a lot of parentheses in this letter. So it's a kind of a complicated, convoluted letter, but from what I understand, we are to adapt Super Princess Peach.
Yeah, we've got to make it commercially viable for the present
palatable
day.
For Western audiences of today. Okay, so that's a little bit hard because I've never played Super Princess Peach.
Well, I have played it. I've played it, and basically it's Tosei. We're doing the quite a lot of Starfy games around this time. There was 3 on the GBA, which have come to NSO on the expansion pack, and 2 on the DS, I want to say, and Princess Peach was Super Princess Peach was just sort of nestled in around that same kind of period, and it's similar in terms of it's a kind of cute, reasonably good looking, sprite art 2D platformer. Not terribly challenging, as you might expect, again, 'cause the Starfy games weren't, but, kind of just, felt a bit like it's got to fill in a spot, in a release lineup for Nintendo on DS in those days with a character that would have had some kind of name recognition. Yeah, and then in terms of how did they, try and make it like a Princess Peach game rather than another Starfy game or, some other character, that's where you get into the part where, I can't see Nintendo being that jazzed about it these days because it basically, the concept was that, this is, pretty easy enough to see. It was, Mario and Luigi have been kidnapped and Princess Peach has got to go and save them. Right, fair enough. But it's like, well, Bowser has set up shop on Vibe Island where everyone is very emotional. And so this does mean that the enemies we get like crying Goombas and stuff, but it also means that Princess Peach herself, principally solves the problems of the game by and this is where, Meowth's reference to the touchscreen, the lower screen, and it's been a few years since I played it, so forgive me if I'm not remembering it. I didn't
guess, by solving math equations.
No, sadly not.
Damn it.
you have like 4 portions of the lower screen that correspond to like different emotional states, and they just basically are just different like elemental type powers, really. And that's probably part of how I change it. But to finish the kind of spiel, so it's like, oh well, if you like make Princess Peach sad, she starts crying. And the tears make plants grow that you can then, like, you know, get to a higher level by climbing something. Or, like, if you make her angry, she's so angry, like, fire comes out of her and it burns this stuff. Or is that? So it's like, it does very much feel like, again, they tried to, like, soften it by saying, oh, well, this is just the place and everyone's emotional here. But it does feel like it's like, well, you started off with the idea of what could a female character do? Well, they're emotional, aren't they? So it'd all be about their emotions. And it's like,
yeah.
So as much as they tried to disguise this fact in the final product, it's probably not really up to snuff in that regard. So yeah, I mean, that'd be my first thing is like, I mean, whether you keep Princess Peach herself as the playable character, I don't know, but just make them elemental powers. Like, just, you know, it's just like, well, it's fire, it's water, rather than it's sadness, anger. Like, just do that. I mean, that's
like they gave her a talking umbrella, didn't they? Like, just make the umbrella magic. Like, it creates the fire, the water,
yeah, so it's an elemental, I believe it was something like Perry the Parasol, I want to say. And, make Perry a magical 4 elements, you know, kind of parasol.
Perry the Parasol, yep, it definitely is.
Yeah. But you know, it's a solid, like, kind of, you know, mostly unremarkable kind of platformer. That's what
it sold 1.7 million copies, so it's not like,
well, DS.
It had its audience.
DS was a successful system, and that was in the earlier phase before, you know, the whole R4 cartridge thing, and you know, like it tended to make it harder for games to sell. You know, so it had favourable conditions. And, you know, it had some attachment to the Mario brand that, you know, was obviously just very powerful in general and was going through a particularly kind of hot streak when you think of how well stuff like Mario Kart DS and the new Super Mario Brothers did at that time, you know, so the conditions were favourable. And there is something, you know, for me now, when I go back to DS games that actually have pixel art, obviously quite a few games, you know, leaned on by this, you know, pre-rendered graphics, yeah, because it was just easier by this time. A lot of those, rather than in the 90s when they were a novelty and, you know, were kind of supposed to be cutting edge. And, you know, after DKC blew up, everyone wanted to do them for that reason. When you get into the aughts, it's just a lot easier to draw the graphics on the computer than it is to, you know, do hand-drawn pixel art. But I've got to say, like, it's stuff that didn't hit me as being remarkable back then. You look at some of them now, like on a DSi, which, you know, is a better screen, admittedly, than like I had for a lot of the DS's life. But stuff like Kirby Superstar Ultra or whatever, you know, the sort of enhanced remake of Kirby Superstar. And this looks great. Like, this pixel art is amazing. I love looking at it. And it's just, how much I took it for granted back that, you know, it was just like, well, yeah, it's pixel art, big whoop, you know, but like some of that stuff really, like, now that you know, don't get as many games, especially, you know, in those like franchises, because we've got very, you know, with the Kirby games on Wii and 3DS, you know, it's all polygonal and, you know, they look good for what they're going for, but there is something about that kind of old school pixel art that has a lot of charm for me. And I think that was probably one of the biggest, you know, kind of attributes of Super Princess Peach. So I would definitely say don't change that. If there's anything about this game, like maybe make it even better looking, something that works at higher resolutions, you know, somehow, but, you know, make it pixel art still.
Yeah, I'm just looking at what else Toes was doing around this time.
Well, that's the thing about it. They were
a lot of games. Holy crap!
They not only were they doing all those Starfy games, but They were, often referred to as the ninja developers, right? In terms of they did a lot of uncredited work in the, kind of Famicom era and beyond and stuff. So it's probably difficult to get a full accounting of just how much stuff they were doing around this time.
Man, they were contributing to wrestling games. Everything. They did so much. Tetris DS, which was unreleased. Yeah. They've done so much stuff. World of Final Fantasy on Vita. They did Valkyrie Profile Lenneth on PSP. Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins on PSP. It's crazy. I didn't realize they were.
I didn't realize they were involved in that. No, that's interesting.
Yeah, there was. Yeah.
But that is the kind of almost like the cliche about Tosei is like that you didn't know what they were involved in, so they're just living up to it.
They were one of the developers on Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13 on PlayStation 3, and they did Resident Evil 0 for GameCube. Like they're all over the place. Their catalog is crazy. That very, very prolific developer. You see here. Yeah. Super Princess Peach. Really, it's kind of in that, it's definitely in that stratosphere of kind of forgettable platformers. I feel like Nintendo has these every couple of years where you're just like, oh, okay, that's their kind of B tier platformer that they're putting out just to fill a gap.
Well, and you wonder, even more so as we go into the future with Switch 2, how much of a place there is for some of this stuff. You know what I mean? Like just, I don't know, it feels like, obviously, look, we've just had, not long ago, we've had a new Super Princess Peach game, Princess Peach game, Princess Peach Showtime, which is a bit of a different kind of slant. It's less kind of duplicative of like just being, a bunch of platformers, you know what I mean? Like in at that time, when you think about it, it's like, well, there were so many kind of platformers that they were doing round about once, on those systems. I mean, it took, with consoles, it kind of took a while for them to come back, as kind of what you were saying earlier, John, about the way that we used to kind of say, oh, well, that's over now. We've moved beyond that. And we just kind of forgot about it, right? Well, consoles forgot about side-scrollers for a long time, and it was really only around the time of New Super Mario Bros. Wii that Nintendo, and I guess a little bit before that, you had Wario Land Shake It. But they really kind of felt, no, like we can do these on consoles again. These are fun. Yeah. We can sell these. Portables is where, they were, still going even before that, and Princess Peach was very much part of that, but it was kind of like, you had Yoshi's Island DS and New Super Mario Brothers, all the Kirby games. There was a lot of it from Nintendo stable. You move all these years into the future. On the one hand, you've got the fact that, they are, Nintendo's as popular as ever. They want to, fill out a release schedule. They've got these characters that have got name ID. So there's scope for it from that point of view. But the other point of view of it maybe is like, with the development resources and things like that, it's kind of leading off from how we answered the previous question, the opportunity cost and all that kind of stuff. You just feel like some of these things are less likely to happen, in the going forward as, the games get increasingly kind of costly to make. Maybe it's going to get harder, for some of these where it is kind of like, it's just another side scroller. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying another Princess Peach game won't happen, because I think Princess Peach Showtime sold alright, but I think they might at least feel the need to like, find a bit of a different niche for it rather than just, hey, this genre that we've already sold X millions in this franchise and that franchise and that, that have got the bigger names, like Mario and Kirby. Let's run another one of those up in there. It will probably still happen, but you got to think it'd be less than used to be the case as time goes on.
Yeah.
I was thinking, maybe I don't have any gameplay mechanics or anything in mind, but I was thinking that since Super Princess Peach was regressive even at the time that it came out, to update it for 2025, it would also need to be a few years behind. And so I think that maybe they would have to make Princess Peach like some sort of girl boss or something. Something that's definitely not of today, but was, popular for a time, or I don't know, some sort of trend for a time.
Trendy. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah. And
boss lady kind of thing.
Right. So I don't know if we turned that into like one of those Yakuza, like cookie clicker, like, quote unquote business mini games, or what. But, yeah, like I feel like that's kind of the vibe that you want to hit with it,
No, I mean, the mini games were mentioned there, and I do remember them very slightly. It was a lot of what people might talk about as being like some of the clunkier aspects of like, okay, again, this is Tosei, they've made a bunch of platformers for GBA. Now you're doing one on DS. What do we do? Well, yeah, there's the whole thing of just having the screen split up to easily activate those powers. But then also, we've got to do mini games that spread across the two screens. I mean, even like, what was it, Mario 64 DS at the very beginning had stuff like that, right? So it's just like, I mean, my recommendation on that score would probably just be Excision. It doesn't need to be there. Just get rid of it, because it was kind of token kind of stuff, really didn't add a lot. It was simply, this is, on new hardware. We need to take advantage, quote unquote, of the new hardware. So this is what we can come up with to do it. If the then wanted to say, well, we need to replace that with something to maintain the substance, the heft of the game, or maybe then, that's where what Guillaume was talking about comes in.
Yeah, and I mean, you're seeing even games that are less gimmicky with hardware, with functionality tied to hardware, like in Xenoblade Chronicles X, that's being removed. It's just like a lot of that kind of stuff has just kind of moved to the wayside as Nintendo is sort of normalized more and is kind of making sort of less goofy hardware. But yeah, it would be interesting to see what kind of, I wonder, do we think that they'll actually go back to the Princess Peach series? Do you think there'll be another Princess Peach game?
Yeah, I think there'll be more Princess Peach games, but where they'll probably just be more different. I don't think just doing it as like a side scroller is the best way to maximize the impact you can make with that name ID. I just, 'cause it just seems like doing, kind of, as I said already, that they're kind of the same thing that the bigger names are doing, but with some sort of twist. And yeah, ideally, if you were doing that now, the twist wouldn't be, well, she's got powerful emotions, obviously, even if it was a good twist, like even if it was something that was kind of more funny or, more kind of creative, I still think it's just not the best way to get money out of it. So I think, I've not played Showtime. I know Goodfield did it, I've enjoyed a lot of stuff that Goodfield has done, but that one is kind of more of a multimodal game. She plays all these different parts essentially on stage, and there's different kinds of gameplay to go with it, right? So
yeah,
that I guess leaves it open for a lot of different ways you could take a subsequent Peach game.
Yeah, I mean, it's sold, well, it says here on Wikipedia, it says it sold 1.22 million copies in 10 days. So there's definitely an audience. I think we'll see another one.
Sure.
All right. I think that wraps us for this week. That's the last of our emails. It was good to get through some of the backlog there. Greg, what do you have for us in terms of music?
Well, a few days before we recorded this on the 23rd, that is a date that's forever etched in my memory because it was the launch date of the N64 in Japan in 1996, which I was just preposterously excited for. You cannot imagine. I mean, even I can't really imagine it anymore, because I am not capable of that kind of excitement anymore, and haven't been for some decades at this point. But it was just, with all the coverage I've been following, with the magazines building up to it, that Mario 64 was going to come out and just revolutionize games, and, to be this transformative experience and all that. And, to be fair, by the time I played, we imported our N64, a matter of some weeks later. We were in the process of moving house at the time, so we might have been a bit quicker had it not been for that, which felt like an eternity to me at that time. But, it was like early in August, we got it, played it to death, loved it, incredible stuff. And, that was still before the American launch in September of 96, and well before the European launch. That wouldn't come until March of 97, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. But, obviously it's something that, I always think of when we get to this time of year. But, there were 3 games that came out for that particular we've been gone through another Nintendo hardware launch in June with the Switch 2. There was the GBA it came out earlier in Japan, but I think the Western launch of the GBA was in June. But for the N64, there were 3 games: Super Mario 64, the Shogi game, and then there was Pilot Wings 64, which I didn't get till later in 96. But I did want to pull from the soundtrack there, because I feel like there's a certain kind of kinship with Mario Kart World here, in the sense that Pilot Wings 64, you had your kind of, your tests, right? For the hang glider and, the gyrocopter thing and all these different things. But you also had the Birdman mode, right? Which was basically just, free flying exploration of the various environments in Pilot Wings. And it's kind of, to me, I feel like it is somewhat, kind of related to what we have today with Mario Kart World. I mean, some of those missions that you get in the open world take on a bit of a Pilot Wings vibe, where you're like flying through a bunch of different rings and all that. But more to the point, it is just the fact that, you can just chill out, mess about, and just explore this environment where, sometimes it does kind of feel like you go in places that are not like they weren't really designed expressly for you to be messing around in them, where, there's elements of the geometry or things that kind of fit. I mean, with Mario Kart World, some of the background characters are just way the hell too big. Because they just, they're designed to be seen from farther away, but when you get up to them close, it's like, this toad is enormous. Like, why? And that's the thing. It kind of just, it reminds me of playing Pilot Wings 64 and messing about in that, kind of, at the time, I felt like this vast environment and all that. But also, the Birdman mode has some pretty, killer chill music. It didn't have the vast soundtrack that Mario Kart World's got at its disposal to sort of keep you engaged while you're just tooling around in the world. But it did have this theme, which is, like, I think they might have used it when they did the advert for it on the expansion pack a while back, where, it's like, sort of, that's, kind of making fun of like how laid back it is, basically. But it's really good. It's really fitting for, what that mode brought to the game.
Yeah. Cool. Well, all right. That'll wrap us for this week. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. And everybody, we will see you next week. James will be back, of course, to continue his reign of terror. And on that note, we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Later.